My name's Amanda Jones. I'm the Delivery Facilitation Officer for the Good Growth Programme. As mentioned, I have a few colleagues joining me today at the event who will introduce themselves properly as we go. If everyone could just remain on mute throughout the event, that would be great until we get to the open forum Q&A. On screen is the running order for the event. As I mentioned, the Q&A will be your chance to come off mute and ask any additional questions, or you can pop them in the chat as we go. And first up, we have an overview of the outputs and outcomes, which is hosted by James Glover, our delivery facilitation lead. James, over to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and hi everyone, and thank you for joining. So I'm just going to kind of talk through overview of outputs and outcomes, kind of what the difference is. A lot of this information is available on our website, so the Cornwall Isles of Scilly Good Growth website, and we will put the link in the chat, and there are kind of links in the presentation to specific parts of our website, so do look at that, because that's where there is a wealth of information which describes a lot of this in more detail. So outputs, what's the difference between outputs and outcomes? So an output is something that's delivered by March 2025, and it's the immediate result of an activity or part of the project, whereas an outcome is normally something that's longer term delivery. So it might be, it will be beyond kind of project delivery end of 31st of March 2025, and that's usually a mid-term wider impact of that activity or project. So that's the kind of key difference between the two, and that's why if you look at your individual grant funding agreements, you'll see specific reference to some things being outputs and some things being outcomes. You're required to report on those that are in your funding agreement against the delivery of the project outputs and outcomes. But there is no requirement, if it's not in your grant funding agreement, there's no requirement to report against kind of wider programme outputs and outcomes, which are listed, only those, again, just in your grant funding agreement. But what we would say is part of kind of monitoring and evaluation, and Phil will talk about that later, you may capture other things kind of in a wider context, so I'll let Phil pick that up in a bit. So for the definition, measurement and types of evidence you would need for each output and outcome, we've got an evidence bank on support resources. So again, that's on our website, the link's there, and as Amanda said, we will circulate this kind of presentation round afterwards to everyone on the call, so you can follow that up and avoid taking kind of notes now. So on that, it will tell you what the output or outcome is, what we're looking at as evidence to show that it's been delivered, and there's different criteria for some of the outputs. You don't need to, there might be multiple criteria you need to deliver against one, not necessarily all of them, but we'll explain that as well in a bit more detail. Now the next slide, please. So in terms of reporting your outputs and outcomes to us, to the Good Growth team, we're operating a tiered system. So I think key thing is, when you submit your claim form, most projects are on quarterly claims in arrears. When you submit your claim form, which you are required to do quarterly in arrears, whether or not you've actually incurred any financial expenditure, that claim form also acts as a progress kind of check on where you are with delivering your project. So there you'd put any outputs or outcomes that you've achieved, the number you've achieved. So if you had, for example, 10 jobs your project had to deliver, you might in claim one say you've delivered 2 of those projects, so you'd put that in your claim form under the outputs or outcomes where it's listed, and then submit that to us. We also require with your claim form a self-declaration form, and that's that you've actually delivered those 2 jobs, for example, and then you would need to keep your project evidence base, which is step 3 of the kind of tiered system of evidence you've actually delivered those jobs. So for example, have you got job descriptions, have you got evidence of them being on the payroll? So that's just an example of how we'd expect it to work. We don't necessarily need to see all the evidence that you've delivered that output or outcome, but you need to retain all of that, and we can request it, and as needed we might want to see it. So that's the key thing. What I would say is, if you're delivering outputs with your first claim while you're kind of finding your feet with the programme, it would be useful to see that evidence, but not necessarily subsequent claims. And that'll be on a case-by-case basis. You'll also need to retain that evidence of outputs and outcomes, because you may be subject to a monitoring visit, and that can happen for a number of years. Even after project completion, that could happen for up to 7 years afterwards. Next slide, please. Yeah, so an overview of monitoring and evaluation. Yeah, the reason it's yeah, so the reason why this is kind of let me just check.
I think this is me now anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's moved into your territory. Yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah.
That's me done.
You're trying to steal it off me. That's fine. Morning, everyone. I'm Phil Woods. I'm the Good Growth Fund lead. So just going to talk very quickly about some overview and monitoring evaluation points for you today. So in terms of monitoring evaluation, we as Cornwall Council, and of course we're the accountable body for the funding, will be subject to requirements around monitoring, evaluation and reporting to government. So it's very much why this is on the agenda. So projects and recipients will need to deliver their own monitoring evaluation plan, which all projects were required to set out when applying for their funding anyway. So this will need to be in line with the Good Growth Monitoring Evaluation Framework and the guidance, and I'll come to that in a moment anyway. And that's again linked from the links that James has already mentioned to our website around the supporting information. And projects are required to consult Cornwall Council really on the monitoring and evaluation report. And as it says there, we really have final sign off on those as well. All projects are required to ensure that evaluations are undertaken externally, and there is a caveat to that, which I'll come to in a moment when I talk through the guidance. Next slide, please. So why do we need to do these? Basically, they are key to helping us understand the effectiveness and impact of the project. They give the assurance around good use of public funds, and they also aid us to feed into future funding thinking. What do future funding programs look like down the line, lessons learned, and build a good evidence base of impact. And that's really important about looking forward to the future. And also to gain a really good understanding of value for money. So weighing up the value of the investment against the impacts of the project. And it's really important from a project point of view, from a program point of view, from a Cornwall on the Isles of Scilly point of view. Next slide, please. So in terms of these are the two documents that sit on our website, and we mentioned those links before, and you'll gain access to those. But really, in terms of the guidance that we've set out, I really wanted to just take you through some of the stuff that tries to help with, and that it's been created for projects to help. So we would strongly recommend that projects start commissioning their external evaluator as early as possible. So that can then make sure that one can be found for a start, and that they're good value. So, but more importantly, by commissioning it early, then it gives the evaluator enough time to really fully understand the project, get under the skin of the program, and understand what's needed in terms of the investment plan, the monitoring evaluation framework, the good growth principles, design and conduct the evaluation well, and of course have time within that process to share the report and review any kind of so tweaks or any kind of versions of control around that lead into the end of the project. It talks about obviously going into evaluations, and it sort of tries to split out sort of 5 areas that evaluators will need to consider when putting that forward as a final report. So the case for intervention at the very beginning, and this is all around the context of the project. What's the market failure, sort of the objectives, the inputs, the activities, the outputs, what are the kind of outcomes, and of course importantly is what's the impact. And that's not just the impact from a granular level, from a project level, but it should also feed into those longer term regional and sectoral effects that should match those outcomes in the levelling up objectives, the good growth principles, and also, of course, the investment plan. And much of the information would have already been captured in your application form. So it would be a matter of pulling that out. We would put a lot of that effort in at the beginning of the project to gain the application, the successful application in the first place. So it's about taking that out, enhancing it, and giving more information around those. It talks about a process review. So all projects are expected to conduct a process review. So that's about how you've managed the project. So this is where the caveat comes in. So the smaller funding allocations of any projects receiving under 50,000 of SPF, really a high level process evaluation, 2 to 3 pages, we think of that. And then and that can be completed directly by the project. The moderate funding allocation, so those receiving 50,000 to 1 million, and that's about a simple process evaluation covering the same topics as those projects receiving lower amounts, but that should be conducted by a commissioned external evaluator. And any larger funding allocation, so 1 million plus, that's a comprehensive detailed process evaluation, but will also include consultations with projects direct beneficiaries such as the businesses, organizations, or individuals. It talks about performance against the outputs and outcomes. So the evaluation should measure and explain the project's performance against those, and all of those ones that have been contracted, the spend, the outputs, the outcome targets. It talks about impact evaluation, as I've already said. And of course, it will lead on to the conclusions and lessons learned. And that's about, was the project effective? Did they effectively implement the project and manage the project well? And did the project provide good value for money? And of course, is there any evidence of additionality in the project also? So that's just a quick canter through that. They're available on our website, and hopefully there's a lot more detail in there, but I just thought I'd take you through a very quick canter through that. So back to you, Amanda, I think.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, James, for running over those slides. So we're going to go into the pre-submitted Q&A now. So thank you for everyone that's pre-submitted questions. I'm going to be reading off the questions, and James and Phil, I'm going to be coming to you for the answers. If any more questions come up about this as we're going, please pop them in the chat, and then we'll go into an open forum and we can bring those up then as well. So James, I'm coming to you first. Over what timescale should outputs and outcomes cover?
Yeah, thanks. So these should be clearly outlined in the grant funding agreement. This will detail when output should be delivered, and progress against meeting these contractual requirements should be covered in each claim form. Where outputs or outcomes have slipped and won't be delivered in time, please notify your project lead to discuss, and a project change request may be required to agree any slippage in writing. So end date for outputs is 2025, just to kind of reiterate that, and outcomes is 2030.
Thank you. The next question was, could you please explain the differences between outputs, outcomes, where the wording is almost identical?
Yeah, so outputs are an immediate result of an activity or project, so normally happen while the project is live or by the 31st of March 2025, and outcomes are usually midterm impact of that activity, but yeah, not necessarily kind of a direct result of the project. They may happen afterwards, and these are as per the government's definitions. So again, the links are all on our website, and we will. I notice some people have asked that in the chat. We'll put them in the chat, but we'll also circulate this presentation, which has all those hyperlinks in it too.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning on that as well that guidance and documents on our website does get updated, and you can tell that by the version number. So it's always best to go directly to the website than using any old links that you might have in any emails or in this kind of chat forum. The applicant support page will always have the latest links on there. Thanks, James. Question number 3, and it's a bit of a long one. In the guidance, it states we need to provide narrative feedback from businesses we have engaged with in order for it to be counted as an output. Can you provide more clarity of your definition on this, please? Although feedback can be encouraged, we can't force businesses to give feedback, and this makes predicting output numbers difficult. And even though a business has fully engaged within an event or intervention, we may not be able to claim an output. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think each project has unique aims and objectives. So I think our guidance is general to be applicable to all projects. So we'd normally ask the project to propose how they plan to measure and evidence delivery of an output or outcome, and then agree the approach. For example, to provide narrative feedback from businesses, you could run online surveys, send businesses the link, then build a representative sample from those that have responded. Alternatively, you could interview businesses that attend promotional events. So there's a number of options, and we're looking for the project holder to provide an approach to measuring and delivering the outputs in line with our guidance. So I think, kind of just to add to that, if people have been involved in previous grant funding programs, they're often quite prescriptive. The whole thing about the Shared Prosperity Fund is it's a lot more kind of flexible, and it's up to projects to kind of propose their approach and then seek kind of agreement from us. So there's a slightly different kind of approach to perhaps other schemes that people may have engaged with in the past.
Great. Question number 4. The knowledge transfer outcome indicator wording was updated to say number of organisations engaged in knowledge transfer activity following support. What is the significance and implication of the change in wording? It's number 4.
Number 4. So yeah. So the change simply makes it explicit that you should only count organisations that you've directly supported through your project and which have engaged in knowledge transfer activities, i.e. you cannot count organisations that have engaged in knowledge transfer activities but which have not had support from your project. So I think it's about that. Your project has directly made it happen.
Okay. Number 5, how will outcomes profiled beyond March 25 be measured?
The projects will be required to submit evidence of delivering outcomes in line with the grant funding agreement to Cornwall Council. It's up to the project to confirm with their project lead how they intend to measure these outcomes.
Thanks, James. Question number 6 for you. Are there any templates or formulas for measuring the external factors such as footfall or visitor number increases? Projects are all measuring the same thing, but could be doing it differently.
Yeah, so it's up to the project to evidence the most appropriate measurement for them. However, we often see common approaches such as electronic footfall counters, for example. We'd encourage projects to share best practice and collaborate where possible on methodology while still delivering their own output targets.
Question number 7. Do I need to submit evidence of outputs in my quarterly claim form?
Yes, you do, and please see the evidence bank for the types of evidence needed. And also we've mentioned the self-declaration form as well. So I think what we're saying here is, yeah, you do need to submit your claim form quarterly, even if you haven't delivered outputs or you're not claiming expenditure. It also acts as a progress report for us. So you're updating us on where you are with your project. So in terms of outputs, you'd say whether you've achieved them or not in that form.
Thank you. Question number 8. Do I need to fill out the output section on each quarterly report?
If you have achieved any outputs in the quarter, please outline this on your quarterly claim and provide evidence.
Thank you. And the last one for you, James, question number 9. Do I need to provide all the required evidence on the evidence bank for each output outcome?
Yeah, the updated evidence bank requires evidence of one or more of the criteria that are applicable. Projects don't have to supply evidence against all the criteria for measuring that output outcome.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. We're going to come on to Phil now, and these questions relate to the monitoring section. So question number 10, I am reporting on a programme of work with multiple interventions. Will they want individual reports for each intervention within the full evaluation, or to report as one without the breakdowns? You're on mute, Phil, at the moment.
Classic error. Right. So yes, it would be useful to have all the intervention breakdowns so we can understand how they're implemented and feed that into any lessons learned.
Well, thank you. Question 11. Is there a good growth team contact for any evaluation related queries we may have during project delivery?
Yeah, so your project lead should be the main point of contact throughout the delivery of the project. So there's also the additional Good Growth mailbox that's there for any questions as well.
Great, thank you. Question number 12. Does the team have any plans to facilitate knowledge sharing or peer learning or highlighting best practice with past and current evaluation reports?
The programme evaluation will be publicly available when ready. So we will continue to feed back to projects throughout the programme, where all projects will benefit from shared learning and experience. We encourage projects to network and collaborate to deliver peer learning, I think.
Well, thank you. Question number 13. With the outputs and outcomes being over a time period longer than March 25, how might one look at monitoring and evaluation charges that would go past March 25 cutoff? Could the external contract be paid for in advance so that support was available to the project in assessing the outcomes?
Yeah, so it's up to the project how you procure and pay for the monitoring and evaluation. You'll need to be satisfied that any advance payments in the monitoring evaluation evaluator will still result in the report and outcomes being delivered as per the grant funding agreement.
Thank you. Question number 14. In the monitoring and evaluation plan, we will be doing this quarterly and ongoing with the participants. How would you like to see this documented on the claims form?
Please provide quarterly in arrears. So if you are delivering 5 jobs in claim 1, for example, the form should show 5. Then if you are delivering another 5 in claim 2, then you should update to say 10 jobs. So delivering a cumulative a cumulative total. I'll get that word out.
Well, thank you, Phil. Question number 15. Regarding monitoring and evaluation processes, when using an outside company to do this work, how do we manage the claiming of their costs past March 25, please? SPF funded M&E evaluation costs. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's the question. You go.
Yeah, so this means the final invoice from the M&E consultant would need to be paid by the 31st of March 25 to the Good Growth SPF team at Cornwall Council. So it's up to the project how they manage their contract and payment terms with the M&E consultant. It's really worth noting, though, that any activity incurred after the 31st of March is not eligible for SPF grant payment.
Question number 16. Is there a list of organisations you would recommend for carrying out the evaluation report, or a particular standard accreditation you would expect them to have?
So if you email the Good Growth inbox, so that's goodgrowth@cornwall.gov.uk, it'll be available amongst all of the material we've got available today. We can provide a list which is for reference only, but we'll definitely, Cornwall Council don't endorse any on that list. It's a list for reference and to help projects understand who's around.
Thank you. Number 17, is there any merit in collective procurement by a number of similar projects? The tendering and procurement value thresholds are aimed at individual project holders.
If you collectively procure, you could put the value of the contract into a different value threshold, which may need to be advertised differently. So it's just to be aware of that. There is also the challenge of who is responsible for ensuring the process delivers the required goods and services to the correct specification, and how payment and grant claims would work.
Thank you. Question number 18. Are there any recommended standardized monitoring and evaluation tools that you would expect to be used? For example, ways of measuring specific outcomes, such as productivity gains or non-financial support to businesses?
The UK outputs and outcomes definition guidance is on the Good Growth website. This details what information is required to measure against the definition in most circumstances. If you're concerned about what evidence is required to support this on your approach to measuring these, please discuss that with your project lead, I would say.
Great. Okay, this is a nice short one. Can my architect do the evaluation?
So you should be externalizing the works. So that's an impartial assessment of the project and the arising benefits. So we are looking for qualified external evaluators or equivalent to look at the widest benefits.
Thank you. And final question for you, Phil. How do we cover the cost of the monitoring and evaluation works?
So projects are required to cover the cost. Some projects have written this into the SPF project application, and where this is an approved cost, this can be then claimed by 31st of March 25.
Brilliant, thank you. Jordan or anyone else that's managing the chat, is there any questions that we want answering live now, or have we managed to get back to them all?
There was just one question about when does the reporting from the evaluator end? March 2025 or 2030?
Emma, we'd like to take that one.
Yeah, so the evaluation needs to be delivered at the end of the project financial timeframe. So that's March 2025.
Brilliant, thanks, Emma. Was there anyone that wanted to come off mute or raise your hand and we can answer questions live on the event? Okay, we've got a question from Claire. Are there any best practice examples of completed? Sorry, my chat's going. Where's it gone? Are there any best practice examples of completed evaluations available to view? Hello, Jordan or James.
So at the moment, we haven't the first projects that were funded are starting to conclude. So we're waiting for their evaluation to come through. So we haven't got best examples from the current programme, but we can look, and what we'd also suggest is maybe looking at other kind of grant programmes and evaluations to see what they've done there. But we'll have a look, and if we can find anything, we'll kind of share that afterwards.
Thank you. Going through. Can a variation be made to increase the project grant bid to include the evaluation cost?
So what we'd say there is, if it hasn't been included yet, you can make a variation. What I would say is that's kind of, you need to do a project change request, so you need to speak to your project lead about that. Also, it's subject to budget availability within the programme, so we may or may not be able to agree that. So just to manage expectations, if it wasn't initially included, we may not be able to fund it, but it is still going to be a contractual requirement for projects.
Yeah, to add to that, I absolutely agree with that, James. I think there'd be, first thing is you may want to rescope some of your budget to align to that. So free up some of the already existing SPF allocation, but obviously talk to your project lead if you require to have that conversation.
Have I missed any others in the chat?
A question about self-declaration forms here. So we're working on the templates, which will be finalised very soon.
Thanks, Emma.
I've got a new thing I want to do.
Someone come off mute with a question. Can you give an idea of the likely cost? Can you give an idea of the likely cost of a programme evaluation?
I think our guidance suggests that it's around 5% of the value of the project, but it will change from project to project depending on the size of the project. So that's the importance of going out to tender and understanding what the market is saying on that. But we estimate around 5%.
Thanks, Phil. And then there's one on, are you planning to create M&E templates for future projects, i.e. also linked to best practice?
So, Phil, do you want to pick that up, or do you want me to?
Yeah, you start. I can come in after.
Okay, yeah. So I think the monitoring evaluation, it's very bespoke to each project. So we wouldn't want to kind of be too prescriptive, and obviously that's what you're using an external evaluator for them to find the best kind of framework to do your kind of monitoring and evaluation report. So we wouldn't be planning to do that. We'd look for you and your kind of discussion with your M&E consultant to do that. Phil, that you add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, James. Absolutely. So yeah, I'd build that into your requirements of that consultant.
Thank you. Was there any more questions at the moment? If anything comes up after this, or you've got a project specific question as well, do drop the Good Growth inbox an email. and your project lead, and we can come back to those. How much flexibility is there to adjust the outputs defined at the bid stage? Zoe.
Yeah, so I guess it's obviously it's understanding kind of the wider context with that question. What I would say is that in return for you being awarded a grant, part of it was on a value for money assessment, which was how many program outputs and outcomes were you going to deliver, what were you going to deliver for the program. So if you're going to change your outputs or outcomes, we'd need to look at what the reasons are. So if you're planning to reduce them, we'd have to understand what that means for the value for money, and would your project have been approved if you're going to reduce them. If you want to change them to other ones, and they'd still give the same kind of, what from our side, value for money kind of argument, and it would have been approved, then we'd look at that. And obviously if you're going to increase them because you're delivering better, kind of greater things or even more things, then that would be fine as well. But anything that is a kind of change in your grant funding agreement does need to be agreed in writing with your project lead.
Thanks, James. Any last questions? Let's come forward. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there. If they do come up in the chat, we'll get back to them afterwards over email. Yeah, thank you everyone for submitting those. I think I've just got one more slide to run over a summary, which will mostly be useful for you when we circulate the slides. But I think, as we've said, everything is on the website under the documents and guidance. It's continually being reviewed, so do always go back there for the latest copies. If you've printed anything off, just make sure you're up to date. There's loads of really useful resources. If you need anything in a different format, let us know and we can see what we can do. But our website under the support resources tab is the best place to go. And then on the next slide, I think we've just got a little plug to our upcoming webinar, which I think most of you are already registered to. We only have 100 spaces available, so if that sells out like this one, just drop us an email and I'll send you the Teams link. There's just some complications with Eventbrite registrations at the moment, so yeah, if you can't get registered on Eventbrite, drop me an email and I'll send you the Teams link to join. But thank you everyone so much for your pre-submitted questions. I think, Richard, have you just got your hand up for one last thing?
Oh, you're on mute, I think. Yeah.
There we are. Sorry. Yes, apologies for not coming in earlier. The question just occurred to me because I know my trustees will ask it. So part of our funding is for a range of capital works. So just to be clear, if those capital works are all invoiced and paid for, but are in actuality incomplete by March 2025, like the work is still going on, is that problematic?
So what we require is we need a project that's financially and physically complete by 31st of March 2025. So what that means is that, yeah, it's hard to give specifics for projects, but effectively, if you're doing a capital build, it will need to be physically completed by 31st of March 2025, and your final financial claim then submitted to us. We can accept that up to the end of April 2025, the claim, but you will have had to pay the builders and everyone by the 31st of March 2025 for it to be an eligible cost. So any activity, physical activity or expenditure that hasn't been paid for by your project by the end of March 25 will not be eligible for further grant funding. So that's the critical thing. So I think what we'd say is, if you're in any concern that you're going to struggle to deliver your project physically and financially by 31st of March 2025, do have an early conversation with your project lead. We can work with you. Can you reschedule it? Can you kind of put more money in up front to kind of deliver the activity in a quicker time frame? We can look for solutions with you. So yeah, do have a conversation with us as soon as possible, and we'd look to help you, because we are aware that this is a very tight time scale that's been kind of set by central government. We've tried to see if there's any leeway, but currently there's not. So that's why we want to work with you to all deliver your projects by March 25.
Thank you.
Brilliant. All right, well, everyone gets a bit more time back this morning. Thank you again for joining, and any follow-up questions, go to the Good Growth mailbox and we'll circulate everything afterwards. Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.
Thank you, everyone.